Hey, how we doing? It's Friday, December 10th. I am creating some video content here of my post-session review and study. It was a pretty swingy session. I'm going to cover some few hands I played here today, so let's get right into it. The first one coming up is down here, table number 4 in the bottom left. I have kings, 3 betting out of the small blind. Um, the player in the cutoff has been kind of like an action player. He's newer to the game. Um, we see a flop of Jack 9-3. This is a spot I've been kind of changing my strategy recently. Um, I'm starting to bet more sort of geometric as a strategy. So that's usually about half, half, half to get it all in from this position, as opposed to sort of range betting the flop. I'm faced with a raise here, and I ran some sims on this, and realistically, I wasn't really sure what to do because he's not supposed to raise here that often. Certainly, he has better hands than me, jacks, nines, sets, things like that. He's never supposed to raise in that spot, I found, and so I wasn't entirely sure what my response was after looking at some sims. Basically, getting it all in with your overpairs there is exactly what you're supposed to do. So that was the kind of the first hand that I was curious about, what the best response is, and it's basically bet 3-bet your overpairs there on the flop if you are going to be facing a raise. This next hand here coming up is also going to be in the bottom left. It's this pocket tens hand here where I raise under the gun and we see a flop of 9-8-3. I fire a c-bet here for half pot multi-way, primarily to put pressure on the person that's in between. And because the button is short stacked, I didn't really mind. This turn, I'll just pause real quick to say I kind of down bet the turn. The jack is not the best card for me in the sense that he can definitely have some jacks that he connects with. I block a lot of sort of more deadly jacks like Jack 10 and things like that, things I'm really worried about. But he can definitely have some jacks here. The thing is, I wasn't sure how often he raises a jack for value here after betting the turn and betting the flop. I wasn't sure if he's just then now piling money into sort of a block and deuce bet on the turn. So I wasn't sure how many jacks were in his range. It was just a curious spot though, given that I have the 10, so I have a lot of the straight blockers here that may come in on the turn. I thought maybe his best hand is like a 2-pair here, jacks, nines, jacks and nines. So I bet call the turn here, thinking I have redraw equity. We get a 7 on the river. Ideally, this is kind of a spot maybe where I like check and protect my range a little bit, but I wasn't sure how often he'd shove worse here if he did have that sort of 2-pair combination that I thought. So I just decided to jam the money in here. I didn't want to miss value, and for some reason I was behind, which I was in this case, to a queen 10 turned gutter. Um, you know, that hand kind of goes how it was, but I didn't want to miss value to potential checkbacks on the river. Um, so that was another spot. I didn't really know if that was the best way to play it, but I figured just piling money in with all the blockers to the nut straight there was kind of the best thing. So moving on, I'm going to have another hand here in just a minute. It's ace king, and here it is right here on the same table. This has been an action table and an action session. Um, this is a newer player to me. Pretty standard 3-bet here. And we're going to take it to a flop. That's going to come down here in just a second of 4-3-3 rainbow. I have some GTO sims to look at this here in just a second. But right off the bat, a 4-3-3 as a 3-better's advantage is going to be c-bet at basically 100% frequency, which we do here. I wasn't entirely sure what to do on an 8 turn. With ace king was one of the things we're going to look at. And then more importantly, I guess the real decision is here on this 8 of spades river. We have ace high. It kind of feels weird. My range definitely has some overpairs here that he could be betting into and getting cut against. I don't think either of us has a lot of 8s. Him, floating that out of position seems unlikely. So when he bombs into me at this size, it kind of just felt like he was trying to potentially push me off of another ace-high chop if he had that. I didn't see how many bluffs he had, maybe like a 5-6, but that's kind of random. Maybe he fast plays that on the flop. So we end up making a call here and chopping against his ace high, ace 6. I think that hand is kind of important for a hand that we're playing later on in the session, but real quick, let's just take a look at just some of the GTO kind of aspects of that real quick. So this is an under the gun versus middle position 3-bet. You know, as you can see on the flop, it is basically completely standard here. You know, not even forced range bet. As a 40% bet, you can bet here 99% of the time. I realize that on an 8 of diamond turn here, one of the things I wasn't sure about is how often we are barreling. So it looks like with our ace king highs here, it's kind of a mix. Blockers matter. In this case, my blockers should have been betting. Some of the other blockers should be checking. I kind of had that backwards. I wasn't considering blocking or the blockers having as much of an impact when it came to this turn decision. I wasn't sure what the frequency was. Basically, this entire turn decision, whether you barrel, is blocker dependent with ace king high. And at the time, I took the check line. And so coming to a river, while I didn't have the villain's exact combination in here, he should be ripping it in here or just betting, you know, with all his ace highs. He has all his other pairs to bet with too. It's a low kind of frequency to have other overpairs, things that he may have played faster on the flop to a check raise to strengthen, you know, polarization range there. But should he get to the river with ace high, it is betting all of those. Was that a good call on my behalf? Well, I have like 20 combinations of ace high here. For the most part, it's calling with a lot of them. Some of the ace kings are folds, more of the suited variety. I found that to be interesting. The suited ace kings are folds. The offsuit ones are pretty much all predominantly calls. So I think we got the call right there on the river. You know, I have an abundance, I guess, of ace highs here, so I can fold some of them. This is, you know, more blocker work. But for the most part, I wanted to make sure that both the turn check was somewhat reasonable frequency and the river call was with reasonable frequency. We can definitely see that to be the case. So we're going to move on to the next hand here, which is coming up. It's a hand against a regular at 935. I flop 2 pair, top 2 pair with king 10. We'll see it here in just a second. So it's right here on this table. Let me back up just a little bit. So we're playing kind of short-handed here. The action player is still in the big blind here. We go 3-way to a flop on king 10-7. I decide to size up to put the person in between in a little bit more trouble to hopefully get the money in easier on the turn and river against the big blind should he want to play, and to discourage 3-way people seeing the turn to a smaller bet here. Faced by kind of small check raise from the small blind. Found this to be an interesting spot. We'll look at it in GTO in a second. I think the GTO response here is going to be to call with 100% of our range. That was my assumption at the time. I wanted to deviate from that for this reason. If he's check raising here and wanting to polarize against me and saying that he has a strong hand here, realistically, the only strong hand that I'm worried about is 7-7. I, you know, beat all the other 2 pairs, and there's just so many draws here. So all the diamonds, all the straights, like double gutters, double things like that, you know, king of diamond plus another diamond for top pair plus flush redraw. You know, I am ahead of all those hands, and the turn and river can get really, really kind of disgusting for me. And the only value hand that I'm worried about is 7-7, and obviously I have live equities to redraw against that. So I decided to 3-bet here. I know it's kind of not GTO, but I figured I'm not really worried about the value that he may have. I am more interested in punishing a check raise range here that is almost certainly all entirely draws. So I thought about jamming here to kind of just deny all the equity, but I decided to 3-bet and call it off. So we'll look at this in GTO here in a second. He banks basically, and let's take a look. So in this particular spot, should the villain raise, he has some sort of calling frequency and he has a raising frequency. Should he raise, I am very much discouraged from putting in a 3-bet here. I found that to be kind of standard from what I know about GTO, but I found that to be completely wrong, I guess, from like reading his range and knowing the action here and just knowing how vulnerable my hand was. The main thing I was interested in is looking at kind of the turn response to certain cards. That was one of the biggest things I was worried about. Essentially, every card from a 6 and higher, I didn't really know what it would do. Basically, I didn't really know what would happen. Because look at this. All these blues are the cards that if he just 3-bets and I call, basically that is, he can barrel pretty much every turn card, and I'm not entirely sure what he does. And if he does barrel all those cards, I'm supposed to be folding, with mixed frequency about half the time. It's a real guessing game. I have very infrequent raises for my specific hand of King 10 suited. Jacks aren't good, queens aren't good, aces aren't good. You can fold on some of those, 9s, 8s. The only card that you're really happy to raise on is a 7 because that eliminates his pocket 7s. So it's just kind of a really ugly spot where I wasn't sure entirely what to do on the turn because I thought every turn card could be potentially gross. I know I'm ahead in equity right now, so I'm going to shovel the money in. That's why I kind of made that play. It didn't work out at the time, even though obviously got it in good. But I wanted to see kind of what GTO, how it would handle the turn, what it likes on certain turns here, because for me, I thought it was going to be very difficult to play the turn correctly. If you can see, my entire range, should he bet into me, it's just folding too often. It's a really tough kind of turn to play. So we took a different route and got it in on the flop, and I found that hand to be pretty interesting from an exploitive sense. Now, we have one more hand to look at. It's also going to be on table number 4 down in the lower left. Let me just cruise ahead here to where it's at. And it's his pocket 10s here. And we're actually going to go 3-way to a flop in a 3-bet pot. He opened min raises under the gun, which was a little bit different from the time he had ace-6 suited. I think he made it 15 and then I made it 40. The small blind here, who's a good winning reg, who plays higher, puts in the cold 4-bet. And you can notice, we have a little bit more depth to our stacks right now. So once he calls, I'm happily calling in position, going through A to the flop, last to act, with a hand that's pretty strong overall. Having the position here is really great. So the 3-better checks, queen 8-7, flush draw. I have no diamond blocker. I block straights. My hand's equity, I think, is pretty strong here. At least hot cold, it's decent right now, especially after the cold 4-better checks. So I like putting him in a weird spot, and I use a bet here. I down bet this tremendously to put him in an awkward spot to hopefully get more clarity about the hand, to deny some equity. I figured under the gun player, should he have a queen or 8s and 7s, sets, flush draws, he probably would have bet the flop himself. So I figured I'd put him in a tough spot as well. With the ace turn, it's kind of hard for me to represent that, or for that card to help me. If I had ace queen, I was already doing well. So I decided to check back. I think that's a pretty standard check back there. I'm not going to turn my hand into a bluff. I don't really need to apply more pressure. The stack to pot ratio is kind of just like, it's not great. Can't really bet fold. You can't really bet. And after him floating that other hand, the ace high, out of position on the flop to the small bet, I figured he could have some ace X's. So we get the queen river. I think the queen river is kind of innocuous. it certainly opens up the possibilities of him bluffing into me. And we're going to take a look at what happens here. He does, in fact, lead into me. He times down. You can tell he times down for a while, and then he bets about 2/3 pot. And I think this is pretty much a standard call here. That was one of the things I wanted to check out in GTO. You know, all the bluffs missed. I don't think he plays queens this way. He could have an ace, but it's kind of a weird value bet. And he shows up with 7s full, bottom set. So he kind of like arranged himself in a way that I just couldn't figure. That was definitely a surprise to me. And we can take a look at that in GTO. So from the very kind of beginning, I know this is like a three-way spot, so it's a little bit different, but if we do have a down bet on the flop, you know, it's going to be employing that just a ton here. And if we get to the turn, my specific hand, all these under pairs like jacks, 10s, and 9s, they're all going to be basically checking back. The hands that are betting on this ace are, you know, 3 of a kinds and 2 pairs and top pairs. And then coming to the Queen of Club river, he's really not supposed to be donking into me that much. I no dock a little bit, which we'll take a look at in a second. But even if he does donk it to me in this sim size, you know, 10s become, you know, pretty much a mixed frequency call. At the smaller size, if he jams into me, 10s are still a call, somewhat low mixed frequency. But I decided to take a node lock here and basically look at this hand as well from over here. If I change the out of position player's strategy to include those kind of like 7s they're donking, including more mixes and everything like that, it still becomes a call with 10s on both sides if he includes some bluffs here, which I thought that he could be bluffing, obviously, when he donks into me like that. So either way, it's basically a call with 10s most of the time. One of the things that I found pretty interesting is that we saw that he's not supposed to be leading a lot of rivers into me, right? But his specific hand with pocket 7s, the out of position player, is betting into me just a ton. He should be betting into me, even jamming into me on all backdoor heart flush draws, which is kind of wild. Even with just a set, he still jams into me with all these hearts that come in backdoor. Or, excuse me, all these hearts that don't come in. So he jams into me with all of those. Or, yeah, all these backdoor hearts. He jams into me when a flush is available. He jams into me on bricks. Basically, the only card he's not really supposed to be betting into me that often on is the queen. And that is the one that he bet into me with his specific hand. So, you know, it was tough to range that player. That other ace's hand, he was a little bit outside of range. The 7s, you know, he didn't fast play the flop. He didn't bet the flop. You know, he leads into me on that river, getting value, which makes a lot of sense. But I found this hand to be pretty interesting. That was my session today. It was a bit swingy this morning. And, you know, these videos are hopefully helpful for you as well. If you're enjoying them, you know, hit me up with a like, share, and subscribe to let me know that they're enjoyable. And I'll see you in the next one.